All right, folks. We got another broadcast coming at you because today had a lot of important developments. It's more of the same, folks. More of the same. More of the same news. Look, we're gonna keep pounding out the information, all right? Hopefully you've all had a nice meal. Hopefully you've had some time with your family. And hopefully you can hear me okay. You may not be able to see me okay unless somebody gets behind me with one of these newfangled cars with their projector beam headlights. But here's the deal, ladies and gentlemen. Here's the deal. We've got news stories that are mainstream now. We've got this mystery illness that is popping up in 13 states now, total. And they're calling it acute flaccid myelitis. Now, we had a situation in the United States a half a century ago where a disease was coined polio that resulted in paralytic symptoms that I believe were a direct result of radiation poisoning and toxin overload exposure. We're in a situation now where, as a result of this campaign 50 years ago, excuse me, they successfully managed to launch what is now commonly referred to as immunizations, vaccinations. They've now managed, as a result of this polio epidemic back in the 40s and 50s, they've managed to get a vaccination framework in place, mandatory in many instances, in many states. And the scary part about this is, and I'm going to tell you an absolute fact that you may never heard of, folks, but the fact is that they have never, ever, ever isolated wild polio virus, ever. Now, what that means is, what they've blamed these neuroinvasive paralytic conditions of the past on is a theory instead of a fact. You see, back in the old days, people used to have DDT impregnated wallpaper. People used to spray pesticides all over their walls. People would be outside walking and a truck would come by and spray a bunch of kids eating lunch at school with DDT. And all of these chemical compounds were par for the normal course in everyday American life. In addition to the radioactive fallout that was coming down in the sky from all the atmospheric nuclear testing. Now, you've all heard that phrase, what goes up must come down, right, ladies and gentlemen? Well, the reality is that when they detonated those nuclear devices up in the atmosphere, there was fallout that came down. We are in a situation where it is reminiscent of the 40s when we are under what's called a toxic overload, because people are being poisoned today, and they're being poisoned by carcinogens. And today the primary carcinogen is wireless radiation. Now, you know, there's a lot of chemicals in the food, there's a lot of pesticides in the food, but there were a lot more chemicals in the environment decades ago than there are now. The water's cleaner than it's ever been, you know, barring the disinfectant toxic halide compounds that are now being added. The bottom line is you're not going to find all the industrial waste in the rivers and in the drinking water supplies like we did. Yeah, there's going to be some places like Flint, Michigan that got issues, but by and large, the water's cleaner, the air's cleaner, the environment's a heck of a lot cleaner than it was 70 years ago. We're not blowing up nuclear bombs, and we're not dumping lead paint into the river. But today, what we have is a lot more exposure to a silent killer, ladies and gentlemen. Radio frequency emissions. Now, these diseases present themselves in different shapes and different symptoms and in different manners, but the primary population segment that's affected are children. Children have, for the most part, less tolerance to poison than grown-ups. Their bodies are more sensitive to toxins. We know that's a fact. Their bodies are more sensitive to radiation. We know that's a fact. And I'm not talking about the radiation coming from Japan, folks. I test regularly for ionizing radiation. And I can assure you that there's more radiation coming from my granite countertop than there is from Fukushima, folks. So I want you to know that I test almost nightly with my particle counter, and the background levels have not increased in Fullerton, California since I bought my particle counter almost 15 years ago. My initial concern when I bought this radiation detector was the hospital in Fullerton and their incinerator. I was concerned that there was a possibility that there would be occasional releases from the hospital incinerator that might be adversely impacting the surrounding neighborhoods, and I am within a couple of miles of that hospital. No such thing. Now, what are we facing? We're facing a disease called acute flaccid myelitis that's affecting young children and causing loss of use of their extremities, and in some cases paralysis, and these children are literally paralyzed. There's one instance of a child who's paralyzed below the nose. He's 3 years old, folks. Here's the deal. They don't know what causes this so-called illness. They haven't identified a pathogenic organism responsible for this metabolic reaction to some sort of external stimuli. We know that this is a nervous system collapse, and we know that the nervous system is electrical, so it's logical to assume that in some way, shape, or form, whatever can short-circuit the neurological system and the spinal cord is responsible. And how do you short-circuit an electrical system? Well, you can overload it, or you can short it out by making contact between some things that are not supposed to come in contact with each other. You can make a circuit out of something that's supposed to be carrying the positive and the negative and not be connected to each other. What I'm telling you is metallic nanocompounds and radio frequency emissions are directly responsible for a lot of cases of neuroinvasive encephalitic paralytic manifestations. Now, there are compounds that they claim to have identified, like this EV85 virus, and I'm not so convinced that viruses even occur naturally based on the research I've done. And by the way, I have a bachelor's degree in chemistry and a bachelor's degree in biological science, folks. I didn't just fall off the turnip truck. I'm by no means a medical doctor, and because I'm not, I can think outside the box when in fact they've been mind controlled to only stay inside their box, because their box is controlled by their god, which is the pharmaceutical industry, which wrote the textbooks and runs the medical schools that they got mind controlled in. Ladies and gentlemen, that's a fact. Now, the solution to obviously what is going on with this neuroinvasive disease that is being manifest in different states around the country is obviously going to be a forced vaccination program. They're probably going to come back with a polio mandate for grown-ups, even though this isn't polio. But you know what? If you tell a lie long enough, people will start thinking that it's true. Or they might actually think the truth is a lie and the lie is the truth. Polio isn't coming back, folks. You know why? Because polio never left, ladies and gentlemen. That's right. Polio isn't coming back because polio never left in the first place. They just renamed it, okay? They stopped the nuclear testing and they banned a lot of the chemicals. So the neurological collapse that came from the toxic overload coincided with just about the same time they rolled out their disgusting vaccine program that gave people a bunch of cancer viruses. We all know that the polio vaccines were contaminated with the monkey virus, SV40, that's given a lot of people all kinds of autoimmune diseases today, cancer and and all kinds of rheumatoid conditions. That's right. The polio virus didn't stop polio, folks. The stopping of the nuclear testing and the banning of DDT and the widespread application of these carcinogenic compounds, as that came to an end, the disease that was really a manifestation of toxic overload on young, immunocompromised and weak people, that began to end the so-called epidemic when they backed off of all this chemical exposure and all these nuclear programs. What we're faced with now, today, is, I believe, a direct result of selectively spiking certain vaccines with certain metallic nanocompounds and nanotechnology that is interacting with wireless infrastructure. Did you know that they can actually hook you up to an IV and have a particular solution filled with nanotechnology that can deliver a drug to a specific cell type in your body that will recognize it just on the basis of the type of cell that it is? And it can open up and drop off the drug and deliver it right to that tissue. That's right. They have these nanomachines that can do good things. Did you know they have nanomachines that can do bad things too? Did you know that swords have two sides to the blade, and they're all called double-edged for a reason, because they can be used for good or they can be used for bad? Look, folks, we're being had. They're setting us up for an epidemic. They're setting us up for forced vaccinations. They're setting us up for an expansion of more eugenics. And a lot of what we're seeing is electromagnetically induced. Some of it is induced by vaccination. And some of it is being induced by these genetically modified mosquitoes that have been infected with stuff and implanted with stuff. And I've talked about this. The common denominator in all of the federal and state and local government response to this mystery illness is A, wash your hands, B, stay up to date on your polio vaccines, and C, avoid mosquitoes. Now, that's about the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life. You want to know why? Because first of all, washing your hands does no good, because they've admitted this is not a communicable disease. So that's a bunch of nonsense. Washing your hands does not prevent the transmission of acute flaccid myelitis, because it's not a communicable disease, because they haven't even identified what the heck is causing it. So how's washing your hands going to stop the transmission of something that's not communicable? Now, the second piece of nonsense that these public health agencies are putting out is to stay up to date on your polio shots. This isn't polio, folks. Polio is not causing this. They've admitted that. So why are they telling you to stay up to date on your polio vaccines when it's not polio, right? Now, the third thing they'll tell you to do is to avoid mosquitoes. How the heck do you avoid mosquitoes when the government is breeding invasive species of day-biting mosquitoes and inserting gene drives into them? That's right, endosymbionts and these bacteria into these mosquitoes, these varying breeds, and releasing them by the hundreds of millions all over the United States. How are we supposed to avoid mosquitoes? This is insanity, folks.